Okay, I keep trying to talk about mothers, and it keeps getting interrupted. That's not terribly surprising. Um, but this is a subject I'm going to want to stick on for a while and elaborate on, because it's something extremely close to my heart, and extremely close to who I am as a person. And this is what I'm doing with my life. Okay, so the thing is that I got to get really deep. I got to get really deep in order to explain a lot of these things. I can explain them on the surface, and then I can dive in deeper. I'm gonna have to structure this. I'm gonna have to write this shit down and structure it. I'd like to share my personal experiences with my own mom, um, the ways that I received those experiences, the lessons I've learned through them, the wounds that I received, and then the healing that I've done through those things. Um, and the the point of expressing any of these things is to shed light on the relatability of these experiences, and to also shed light on the toxicity of them, and the importance of healing from them, um, and the ultimate, benefit of healing from them. It's something that, in experience, um, my mother wounds were very deeply hidden. I assumed that I had just daddy issues my whole life until I realized that uh, really the core of all of my issues was stemming so much from my mother wounds. And um, it has been quite a process to even begin to acknowledge those things, let alone address them properly. And I still struggle so much enough myself. I've been out in the world. I've also found situations where other people are also struggling with the same sorts of things, um, but especially with a lack of awareness of these things. And like, it's been my saving grace. So I want to impart some of that wisdom in order to benefit those that are going through the same sorts of situations, or that have and are trying to heal from them. Because there's uh, like my personal experience, there's so much more at play, obviously, than just my personal experience, right? So, like, the best I can do is be able to share it as honestly as possible from my own perspective, in order to, you know, help people, hopefully be able to kind of navigate through theirs. And yeah, I would say that, like, man, even maybe discussing like the dead issues, like the whole process. This has kind of been a cultivation of what I've been trying to do all along, is um, be able to kind of pick apart my life experience in such a way that I can, um, you know, elaborate on my experiences in an educational way that I can. It's just a lot. I'm sorry. I'm all over the place. Okay, so like when I share my experience, I'm sharing it from a unique perspective because it's my own, it's my unique experience. But ultimately, like, nothing that I've experienced is beyond relatability for really anyone. It doesn't just have to be people that have experienced those exact things. Um, so I hope that in the way that I express my experiences, I'm able to convey um, a deeper connectivity in them. Um, my experiences might, for some people, be hard to receive, but for others, they're the exact structure needed to kind of come out of even worse places. So, everything in perspective, I suppose. But so when I was 6 weeks old, my dad died in a driving accident. At least that's what I was told. And he was 30 years old. my mom had my two older brothers and myself, um, and had to take on the whole family. And she was devastated, obviously, losing her partner. And um, she ended up finding my stepdad, who was a dude that worked at the same factory that my dad had. And my dad's best friend introduced them. Apparently, he never knew my dad, but they worked at the same factory. And he and my mom got together, and got married about almost 2 years, just under 2 years after my dad passed. And my stepdad raised me, and with my mom, they were together my whole life, and so I was raised with my parents essentially, and with my two older brothers. And also, although my dad had died, we still technically had a pretty traditional home. We went to churches, we went to Christian schools, we were Christian. My parents had become Christian, uh, I believe, somewhere along the line of my brothers being little, um, or maybe just prior to my brothers being born. Um, but they kind of used religion as the foundation for their relationship. My parents, really, I guess both my parents, but like my mom and my stepdad, used the religion, and kind of their concept that they always said was that they didn't always know the right things to teach us. So they kept us in schools and churches in order to give us a discipline that they didn't fully have themselves, which was ultimately a gift and a grace. But at the same time, it was conflicting to have to process, the seeming hypocrisy of them not being able to hold themselves to the standards that they hoped for their kids to be held to, right? Or that they held us to. And so I grew up Christian, grew up pretty sheltered in different ways, because my parents were trying to keep us out of the lifestyle that they had been engaged in, but we're also, like I said, like uneducated about a lot of those things. So they were just trusting whoever was leading our churches and schools. We moved churches and schools, but um, as I got older, I started to be able to reassess those things and pick those things apart and understand that there was actually a lot more going on, um, than I was aware of as a child, obviously. And things like, especially in my 20s, reassessing my childhood became quite sinister. A lot of that stuff, but um, I will get into that later on. So we moved around a lot, changed churches, changed schools. Every couple of years, I was having to change friend groups and stuff like that. So I wasn't. I had my older brothers, but I was shy and outgoing at the same time. I just had a weird personality. Still do, obviously. Um, but I struggled with social stuff. I struggled with friendships. I struggled with personal relationships. I was a really conflicted kid. I was just kind of. I was you know really obnoxious. I was really undisciplined and of myself. I was really people pleasy. I had no sense of identity, and I was seeking it through everyone else all the time. Um, extremely codependent. Didn't really think or feel for myself. Extremely emotional, sensitive, but also very emotional, given to my emotions. Just lacked a lot of control. I was sloppy. I was messy. I was dirty. I was, not clean. I wasn't neat. I didn't care about that stuff. And I struggled with like my gender identity, and I struggled with my status in society, and being the youngest and being the only girl. I was raised differently than my brothers, and I was kind of, not that I was left to fend for myself, but I was always very good at taking care of myself. So the focus was generally on my brothers, and often that was kind of like part of the theology that we were taught as well, because the focus was on men being the breadwinners, and men being the head of the household, and men being the face of the family, and women being the servants. Being submissive, and women weren't meant to be given to intellectual pursuits, or to like physical labor, or to any sort of like isolation, independence in of themselves outside of a male structure. So like I was always very obedient to those things, and kind of just suppressed myself in order to maintain those things, up until I was an adult. And then I was basically like forced to care for myself, or I took the opportunity to care for myself um, when it was either that, or completely, sell myself out for just to appease other people. I mean, once I matured, I came to the point of being able to care for myself, and I took that responsibility seriously. I thought my parents were going to be proud of me for it, but they were not. They were not. They didn't want to raise an independent woman, and it's kind of always been a thorn in their side. Um, but I felt that way even as a child, even when I was being fully obedient, and wasn't speaking up for myself, and was always just like readily available to be there for anybody for whatever they would need. I still felt like a constant burden. It wasn't like my needs weren't being met. My expression of any of my needs wasn't even uh, like acknowledged, let alone validated in any way. So like I was expected, pretty much my whole life to just fit a specific role that I always struggled to fit. I tried very hard. And really, like, my saving grace was my heart for God, my heart for concepts larger than myself, my heart for people, and for nature, and for connectivity in those things. And like it's always that way. It's always weirdly that way. And like even at 8 years old, I dedicated my life to missions, all on my own. I was always witnessing to people, making tracks for people. I was always trying to pray with people. I was always trying to do that stuff because that's what I was taught spirituality was. But even in my own capacity to understand spirituality outside of those things, I was like talking to animals, and like talking to ghosts and shit even. And like I didn't really understand what I was doing. We didn't talk about stuff like that. Like we were actually told most any of that type of stuff was satanic, so we stayed away from those things. But like there was a natural proclivity I had towards just seeing things in a different way, or like resonating with things in a deeper way. So as much as I was trying to cater to Christianity my entire life, I also didn't really fit the standard ever, and that was always a point of conflict. It was really confusing and conflicting as a teenager because I was in rebellion against the structured Christianity that I was raised with because of the hypocrisy I saw in it, and the hypocrisy it was forcing on me because it wasn't allowing me the space to truly experience my actual relationship with God, and to work it out, and to know it, and to stand in it myself. It was just forcing a standard on me. But in my rebellion against that, I was also rebelling against, like my parents. I was rebelling against different forms of authority. I was rebelling against a toxic family dynamic. I was rebelling against a toxic society. I was rebelling against, all of these gender roles and stuff that I was confused about. I was rebelling against myself as well. All of that was so heavy, and it was making me feel extremely insecure, more than I already was. And although I was trying to stand in some sort of confidence, I was also extremely self-destructive. So I was confused. I was extremely conflicted. I was a mess. I was an absolute mess from pretty early on in my childhood, all through my teen years, and even in my early adulthood. I was pretty fucked up mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And I don't know, like even my parents had always tried, like they were always around. They were always like faithful to make sure that we went to church consistently, and that we went to Christian schools, and that those types of conversations and communications were common in the household. But there was just such a large aspect of their making an excuse that they didn't have to be held to the standard that they were hoping that we would be held to, that I just couldn't not swallow. My own pride, being like, well, if you're not gonna do it, how are you gonna expect it of me? It's a pride issue. I mean, they're my parents; they don't have to do shit. I can still be my best. I let that keep me from so much for so long. I actually let that make me like I made that an excuse as to why I didn't have to be more productive or successful or progressive, in my own life. And that's not helpful. It was a gift to be given that my parents were willing to give us more than what they had had and expect more of us than they could even of themselves, to be honest. Um, yeah, there's a hypocrisy in it. And I've learned now how that can structure my like healthy boundaries in managing those relationships. But my own relationship with myself can always benefit from those types of things if I'm willing to let it. My own relationship with God, with myself, like, depends on my willingness to receive good of those things instead of to receive the curse of them. The curse of it was that I wasn't becoming successful, that I was keeping myself low, that I was keeping my light dimmed, wasn't communicating my truth honestly, doing a lot of appeasement. And like I still struggle with that. I mean, I'm always finding myself in these positions where I'm realizing how far too willing I have always been to compromise myself and how truly blasphemous it is. I mean, if there's the only thing I can prove unto myself is my own relationship with myself and with God to myself. So like, if I'm going outside of that for any, like, I can't make to the excuse to myself that like, oh, I just did that because this person, like, it was going to make them feel better, it was going to make them happy, it was something that like they needed. Like, if it's compromising myself, ultimately, like, at the end of the day, I can't hide that from myself even if I try to, you know. And so I learned some really deep, weird sense of accountability through my experiences. So my parents did right by me that way, but it didn't feel that way. And especially in my 20s, like I said, I had taken things in a very sinister fashion, or like the way that I was analyzing my experience was very cynical because I was in the victim mentality. In order to even like begin to process those things, I really like had to make that allowance to be able to see that I had been victimized, but I also had to come out of that to be able to see that it hadn't stopped me and that it was actually a gift given for my strength and my understanding of things, and not to give fear to those things more than anything, because like, even if those systems are attempting to continue or to hurt me or to use me in whatever ways, like, it's my power to allow those things that really gives it any power. So like, if I'm going to sit here and harp on the fear of those experiences happening again, I'm not giving myself the support and validation that I truly have my own power, and that the reason that those things even happened in the first place was because I didn't know better then, but I know better now, sort of deal, right? So like, you know, yes, I was an innocent victim to many things in my childhood, but that doesn't make me an innocent victim any longer now that I know those things. Um, and so I can't keep playing the victim either. There does come a point of responsibility upon maturity, which generally happens after you've gone through the experience, whether you want it to happen or not, um, depending on how truly dissociated you are. But even then, like, all things in time have revealed themselves to me. So, like, I don't think anybody can get away from it. When I was a hospice care nurse, like, people had experiences that they had never shared with anyone that they carried to their deathbed. And I'm sure that there are experiences that many people have died with too that they just never shared with anybody. But many of these experiences people have shared with me on their deathbed because it was just stuck in them. And it honestly, like, what's the saddest thing for me? And like, I'll help heal people through those things in their end of days. But like, the worst thing about it is to think that at 30 somebody engaged in something or was forced to engage in something that riddled them with so much guilt that they couldn't accept themselves fully their entire lives, the entire rest of their lives, that at 30 and then at 80, 50 years, almost twice as long as they were ever even alive when that thing happened, they still haven't been able to process it, accept themselves, love themselves through it, be able to take those things and use them for some greater purpose. um, and it's a true shame, because that's truly our greatest power in this reality. And to bring it back to like the mother wounds, that's why it's one of the hardest wounds to deal with, and it's one of the sickest issues. It's to me one of the most like powerful demonic forces is the misappropriation of the divine motherly energy and position, and it's super common nowadays because so many women just have kids for their own selfish purposes, and like we're not just having kids, like these are human beings that have their own souls and experiences, and like are going to go out into the world, and like it's not about you. It's not about you. If you have the gift, if you have the pleasure of being able to have a child, that's a gift that the universe has given you to be the vessel in which that child was able to come through into this world. You're supposed to be like your entire self has become a source of sustenance for that child, and it's not about you. It's not about you. You're about you. You keep on your shit, but like when it comes to having children, like it's about those children, and far too many women, and they'll validate it in our society that they really care about their kids, and that all they think about is their kids, when like really they're just trying to get one over on their baby dads, and like they only really care about like money and comfort, and the only reason that they even have their kids is because they just want to feel comfortable and good about themselves, and they like use their kids in all of these ways, and like it's super common. Like people aren't even trying to be evil, right? But like that shit is evil. That shit is evil. When the person that is able to turn two halves of you into a whole and nurture that into a fullness of being able to be manifested into reality, and then births you into reality, and then nurtures you up during your infancy to the point of being some sort of sustainable being. Like no matter how much care she does or doesn't put into those things, there's an innateness in that nature, in the nature of that relationship, that is so sacred and so essential to our core development. And to have those things not properly respected, whether by the mother, by the father, by other family members, by the community, by the world at large, those things all have very different impacts that are extremely deep, that are extremely, like I said, like they're fundamental, they're essential to our core. Um, and we we live in a time where, like I said, like not only are those things just consistently happening, but they're actually being validated in our society to happen. And there's a reason that that's the case. And it's because of how it impacts our psychology from the get-go, from the very start, and how it impacts our capacity to be um, in full alignment with God so easily. It shouldn't be a struggle, but in today's world, you have to fight for it. Like you can't just do the natural thing. You can't just do whatever comes to you or just follow whatever anybody's saying. Those things are almost assuredly the wrong things to do, or they're the least sustainable things. Um, Sustainability at this point is found in the experience of education itself, in the experience of the education of how to sustain the experience. There's no way outside of it, there's no way to it outside of our capacity to receive it unto ourselves, and then um, implement it in our own personal experiences. So the mother wound um, is one that, even more than the father wound, because like a man literally is able to project semen outside of his body and then walk away. He doesn't have to have any other part in the development of a child. But a woman not only receives that, but then nurtures it, carries it, and births it into the world. There is something so deeply sacred about those acts, every part of it. Um, and there's a deep interconnectedness that we have genetically in our DNA and spiritually to our mothers, um, even if we never knew them. Like even if we were given up for adoption right away, like there's still this deep connection to that person, to the code of DNA that they carry with them. There is with the father too. They're very separate, they're very different, but the mother wound is one that, like, when it comes to our third dimensional experience as an individual human being with an identity that was given to us in order to exist in this reality. Like the mother is the father is like the sustainer, but the mother is the creator. The mother is the deeper of the two, when it comes to the active experience. So like both are essential and both are in balance and both have their own powers when it comes to balancing your spiritual and your physical world. We have created a society that is very strongly uh, initiated into the concept of the father figure, but we have taken that into the physical, and we have only taken the mother figure in the spiritual. And truly, it's almost supposed to be the opposite in order to maintain a proper balance, but between the two, there is a proper balance. Um, and these mother wounds are ones that are used in this third dimension, that are used in our active experience to really disillude us to the reality of those things. A child